Peter.
Hello, everyone. My name's Peter Towers. Welcome to this podcast today, where we're going to discuss some interesting activities to do with accountants. I'm joined today by Sam Salcman, a partner of Edwards Pearl from Melbourne in Victoria, and Andrew Geddes, one of the joint founders of the Financial Management Research Centre, and for 10 years a director and chairman of Green Cross Limited. Good morning, Sam.
Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good morning, Andrew.
Peter, how are you going?
Good, thanks. Sam, welcome and congratulations on having been a member of ESS BIZTOOls for 25 years. You're the longest participant.
I didn't realize I was that long.
Yeah, that's what my administrator tells me. And we both know that was the true, of course. I first met you at FMRC in Armidale many years ago, in about
It was the most pleasurable experience of my, the 90s.
Well, thank you very much. And could you tell us how you've used products like ESS BIZTOOls over the years and what benefit they've been for you and your firm?
Well, the news is both good and bad. The good news is the endeavor was there, the challenges were there, the desire was there to implement as many of the tools as I possibly could. And I must admit that I've tried too many things from one thing to another. But in essence, I always was of the view that having systematized processes was the only way to cope with a very difficult climate. As I was starting out, there were so many possibilities. I came from originally a manufacturing environment, or I became a manager of a manufacturing firm, which was in the shoe industry.
Oh, okay.
It was a family business, a very large family business, which ultimately did not survive the tariff reforms that were brought about by the Whitlam government.
Right.
Something like several hundred of those firms existed in Victoria, and only 2 survived the onslaught. So I came from that environment. Then I decided that I was going to change my preferences from science, which was my original field of study, to accounting. And then I discovered how little I really knew about the world at large. And I went through a process in the accounting industry, having started as a junior accountant working in a insolvency firm. And that was the best training and grounding I could possibly have for the future. But I realized how disorganized the place was, that was led by people who essentially were egotistical. And I think there was a comment that Andrew had made not long ago about certain categories of CEOs and CFOs, in terms of that they run their businesses totally focused on themselves and not on their senior management team. And that was my experience. We were corralled into little corrals, not allowed to say boo or move without putting their hands up and saying, I'm going to have a toilet break. That was the kind of profession we had in the 80s. And I worked for a middle-sized national firm at first, then one of the largest insolvency firms, which then began its life, Perry Hodgson. So that was an interesting experience. But having attended with you, Peter, the first seminar on benchmarks with FMRC was a life changer, because I began to understand that statistics, measuring, was the name of the game. The only question was, to what extent could one effectively implement this with a client base which essentially knew nothing about this, and with staff and partners who essentially disliked the concept and focused entirely on the type of accounting that we used to, tax compliance. So that was the beginning. But the tools that you produced over time, which I think has not yet reached the apogee. In other words, there's no end result. You seem to evolve your whole systems in a way that meets the needs of the day. So, for example, when you started, Peter, doing business grants and exploring the whole nature of what is available, how do I use it, how do I introduce the clients to it, that reflects the kind of a mindset that you grew in the profession. In other words, you were pioneering. And I think to a large degree, even today, you are pioneer in that business advisory space. Now, that is not to say you won't be supplanted like all of us are in fullness of time. But in essence, the tools have now been multiplied manyfold by many other firms as well. But in the case of ESS BIZTOOls, you still are the benchmark for excellence and for the way you focus on the essentials. So it's like a Lego game that I now play with my two little grandchildren. You use building blocks and increase complexity as you go, having mastered the basics, progressing to other areas that build on that, to hopefully reaching an apogee where you are delivering a service to clients, which is all embracing in every aspect. And I think that's my experience of BIZTOOls. Even in my current email box, I still have every single paper I've ever downloaded from any business tool. And my partner says, what the hell do you keep it for? And I said, that is my knowledge database in the full sense of the word. If you need something, and of course he calls on me, I just pull it out and I said, this is what I did. This is for whom I used it. And guess what? These were the results, wrongly or rightly. So that's my background of using ESS BIZTOOls. I think it's today, knowledge is in every sense is paramount. And we are not obviously exclusive possessors of that knowledge. And we're being little by little supplanted by generative AI, which is in early stages of development, but it will impact severely on that advisory space in due course. But look, you set the benchmark, you've sustained the game for all these years, and I think every accountant who's ever used this process that you developed, Peter, should be thanking their lucky stars.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thank you. Andrew, how do you see what's been happening with products like ESS BIZTOOls and others in the accountancy industry?
Well, if we go back, I met you and Sam 35 years ago, and it was inspired by Jeff Meredith, Professor of Accounting and Small Business and Entrepreneurship. And his message simply was, we need to help small business owner-operators because most of them were very good at the thing they did. They were great dentists, or they were great builders, or they were great plumbers, but they weren't necessarily good at business management and development. So he said, apart from doing their tax returns and various other compliance returns, we should try and help them run better businesses. That's why he created benchmarking, so that we could look at the top profit earners and try and get in behind them. We used to run workshops for, Mitre 10 hardware stores, and the best operators, we'd interview them and find out, how do you go about running your business, and try and share that with the others. So that was Meredith's message that inspired you, and you were in practice as an accountant then. It inspired Sam and others like him, and we all tried to help small businesses run better businesses. That's still relevant today. Accountants do have a focus on tax and compliance, but some of them, like Sam, have learnt or come from a background like Sam, where they've worked in Sam, management accounting and then insolvency, so has a natural tendency to look at how do you run a good business and try and help clients in that way. I think the major challenge is most accountants have too many clients in compliance, and they struggle to have enough time to help those that really, those that need it often can't afford it. So the challenge, I think, today is to look at, can we start to put information in front of clients, comparing them to better profit earning businesses? Can we do what Sam's done and give them a paper on business planning from ESS BIZTOOls? and begin to have those conversations. So I think the challenge is still there, Peter. Sam is right in saying that AI will influence the production of words, but AI won't solve the challenge of getting a client willing to do things differently in their business. That requires conversation and mentoring and education. So the need's still there. The tools are becoming more sophisticated, but the thing that you did was to document how to do a business plan, how to run debtors better, how to do stock control, how to do pricing of your plumbing services. Accountants can get these documents and hand them to clients and, more importantly, eyeball them and have conversations about how do you do it? Have you read this? Could I refer you to bits and pieces? That challenge is still there. I'm still working on helping a small handful of clients do exactly that, as are you, Peter, as you do, Sam. We're still all trying to do that same basic thing.
If I might add, there was a recent article, I think it was in the Economist magazine, which referred to a study done internationally by a group of economists on entrepreneurship. And they selected a place called Togo in Africa. And they were trying to measure what type of tools work best to encourage entrepreneurship. And
Yes.
Surprisingly enough, despite the fact that it was my belief that it's always teaching clients and giving them checklists and giving them turnkey systems, there was something lacking. That study showed that essentially another element was critical to encourage entrepreneurship, and that was psychology. And I
Yes.
think in future we will find that the so-called trusted advisor model that we hope to achieve as accountants will incorporate elements of psychology, particularly encouraging accountants to add a unit of psychology, etc., or maybe even more in their university courses. And I've noticed over the years, if I adopt a totally empathetic model or approach to clients in every aspect of their lives, to the extent that they will allow me, that aids changing their mindset.
Yes.
Simply interacting on giving them advice purely simply without understanding what drives them, what their family relationships are, what their aspirations and goals are, personally as well as business, shows that approach is more, what's the word? I think more effective. Of course, it's not empirically tested in the full sense. Those kinds of studies were rare, even nowadays still rare. Even if you peruse as many articles in the Harvard Business Review, you don't necessarily see that much focus on small business and its psychology.
No.
And I think that space is still underdeveloped everywhere, not merely in this country, certainly in the US, and certainly in Europe.
So, Sam, that's interesting because I did two units of psych in my commerce degree at Queensland Uni. And in the workshops we developed at FMRC, we built into those sessions on understanding your behavioral preferences and understanding the behavioral and communication style of your clients and adjusting how you went about dealing with them accordingly. So it's interesting you say that because I agree. It's if you ask me what I did, I'd say I was more of a psychologist than I was an accountant.
That's a very interesting comment. For example, many years ago, I had the utter pleasure of going to seminars by an academic in one of our universities in Geelong. And he developed a process of communicating, which was interesting, that accountants must observe what kind of clients they're dealing with. Do they receive information orally or visually or whatever else? And in order to inculcate that mindset in my own brain, what I used to do was to sit with the client on the same side of the desk or the table, to build up empathy, that I'm not here to interrogate him or anything else, but that I was on the same plane with him. And over the years, perceive how clients communicate. Not enough accountants, I think, understand clients real as human beings. And this, I think, is one of the major criticisms I have in generation Z currently. The lack of understanding even older clients, if they happen to be in their early 20s and anything else. I think it'll change over time, but it's a big question mark, very big question mark, particularly when we engage these new employees of that generation.
Yes, time will give them maturity and judgment, but they can be taught about behavioural preferences.
Correct.
So I think that you're right. It should be a core part of their undergraduate studies, understanding yourself, understanding people, different communication methodologies and preferences and styles. It's you can't be an advisor unless you win the trust of the client and gain their permission to impart things to them.
Correct. And we live in a very much atomized world that the generations past were more inclusive, they were more communicative, person to person. The isolation of this present generation, Gen Z, worries me no end. I can see that in my own family.
Yeah.
There is not enough connection, human interaction. It's done through mostly social media, which does not generate maturity or understanding of the world at large.
Too much screen time, not enough playground rough and tumble.
Correct.
Where you learn social skills. Sorry, Peter, we interrupted you.
No, that's all very interesting. Because,
couple of old blokes having a yarn.
But I think one of the problems that we've got with the accounting industry as such is not enough of the participants, not enough of the partners, but even of the recent graduates have worked in an industry environment. They've been brought in on a higher pedestal, but they're the professional advisors. I think what we need to realise is we are part of a team, and teams are headed in a larger corporation by a CEO. And the CEO or managing director in the SME kind, of course, is the owner or the person appointed to that title. And I think accountants need to realise that when we're in that environment with the client, with their salesperson or their production person or whoever else is part of their leadership team, as the accountant, we're part of the team. We're not superior to the team. And I agree with Sam, sitting on the same side of the table. I still find, to my horror, a number of accountants, partners, don't know where their clients' premises are. Because I do consultants and say to them, well, let's go out to the client's premises and we'll go through it. That's where the meeting will be tomorrow morning. And I get a shocked look. And I've learnt what that look now means. They had never been there, got no idea. I said, every time I went to a client's premises, I come back with at least 2 or 3 days' work that the team had to do, because I sat there and I said, oh, we can do that. They were having trouble with a debtor. They were having trouble with something else. We could fix it up. And I think that's all part of this same story, isn't it? It's knowing where we fit.
But also the missing ingredient quite often is, because we're so busy and so focused on other matters, that we don't do these how-tos. In other words, we don't contact clients out of the blue and say, how are you? How's the business? Yep. I heard this story about a similar business. Have you heard about it? Have you thought about what's happening? In other words, you are maintaining a chain of communication with the client on an ongoing basis, and not when you need to do, absolutely demanded by compliance services. But it's a human reaction. Admittedly, it's largely non-chargeable, and of course must be non-chargeable, but it builds confidence in the client that his accountant, his professional advisor, cares about him and cares deeply about him.
Yes, so maybe you need less clients to achieve that, Sam. That's the challenge.
That is the major dilemma. And the question of profitability for accounting practices has become very much a key issue of the present era. I mean, the other matter, of course, is the profession faces 4 key challenges. There's the issue of retention, the fact that we're declining numbers of accountants being put through universities, changing social mores which discourage people from participating in accounting courses, I mean, I think it was a recent stat in America that in the 2 years ago, there was a study done which showed that the number of accountants dropped from 2 million to 1.6 million in 2 years.
Yeah.
And that is a major drop. And the same thing applies to this country as well. Migration plays an enormous part in Australia. The fact that we've, during COVID, stopped migration, particularly students coming in, meant that the profession suffered a double blow. And I think there's also the question of what COVID did to the the accountants, particularly with the big four. The tragedy is that the smaller firms in that period retained their staff because they have offered support, did not diminish their salaries, did not sack them or suspend them or anything else. And the big four, unfortunately, decided for matters of economic necessity to sack large numbers of staff, particularly in advisory areas. That scarred a generation because you can hear quite a few accountants who didn't want to participate in industry after COVID because of the way they were treated by the big firms. And it's very hard to change the dynamics now, very hard. I mean, one other challenge, of course, is adoption of technology, which is always challenging for any size firm, I would think. Yeah, of course, the issue that you raised earlier, Andrew, was the issue of affordability. Our small business sector in this country is facing a crisis.
Yes.
A crisis of confidence in the government, and perhaps even to a lesser degree in the opposition, that they are not listening to small business. And there's a total disconnect, much worse than it was, let's say, in the late 80s, when we had major inflationary pressures.
Agreed.
Despite the fact that the government talks about achieving budgetary surpluses, that has come at the price of destruction of many a small business. Virtually every city that I know in this country now has empty shops, empty buildings, empty office space everywhere. And in this state, in Victoria, particularly in Melbourne, it's a disaster. And that flows through to every aspect of our small business existence.
Small business is the major employer in this country. That's what the government has forgotten with its red tape and excessive, inflationary pressures on small business.
But it's also the fact that this government has only really two ministers who had any experience in small business. I think there's Tony Burke and I think Don Farrell, the only ones. The rest have come straight through the innards of the political party or from the trade union movement with no sympathy whatsoever or interest in small business. And in order to create a formation, a revolution, you have to begin somewhere. And I can't see this government doing anything in this space. And the current reform measures are designed to hurt, really hurt small business. And I thought, how else can you run an economy when you destroy the major driver of it?
Indeed. I was in Sydney over the weekend and visiting my daughters and grandchildren. The pleasing thing is all five of them have jobs outside of their either school or uni involvements. And most of them are in small business in their local regions. They're either pulling beers or they're serving meals. But you look at the hospitality industry. My cousins partnered with a grape grower, winemaker, a retired professor of oenology. He's got 400 acres, which is a big vineyard holding. He's closing his wine business because all the small restaurants are in great strife and his wholesaler distributors in great strife. There's record numbers of insolvencies in that sector. Again, it's driven by costs of operation, rents, IT, insurance particularly, rent and insurance, and the inflationary effect on cost of goods sold, their purchases. So, Sam, it's right. I just see it as I travel around. It's not only the empty offices, but there's a lot of small businesses who are, we've got record insolvencies happening in the hospitality sector as we speak.
I think it's probably the greatest in my lifetime. Even the 80s did not indicate that level of destruction.
No.
And what is also extraordinary is how do I put it? The changing structure of taxation at state level is destroying
Yes.
the ability by business owners to own their own buildings. It forces many a landlord now to sell down their properties because land tax has become an impost, in many cases exceeds the actual income from properties. And the current government attempts to visualize possible reform in the negative gearing space will drive this process again more into the negative territory. I mean, you ask yourself, what happened to tax reform in this country? It just simply has not progressed.
Stopped. Yeah.
Totally and utterly stopped. And I think also in a professional sense, what we've seen in the last 12 months coming from the government on reforms for the code of conduct of tax agents, which has been conducted largely without consultation with the profession facing a crisis where if changes are fully implemented, will result in a kind of a dob-in mentality against your clients, will destroy the fabric of our relationships with our clients.
You're being asked to be their auditor.
More than the auditor. You would have to
On
be
behalf of the
a
ATO.
whistleblower.
Yeah.
And imagine the distrust that will create in that relationship. Unimaginable distrust.
Terrible. Yes. They're just examples of governments who are not making the right decisions to help small business. And that comes back to client accountants. You're better clients. You need to get alongside them and help them and use Peter's tools. Some of the clients that are struggling at the moment, well, best to save the ones you can. I know that's bloody minded, but that's the way I see it. Get alongside the good ones and make sure you're helping them, because it's going to be tough for a year or two.
But also the fact of the area of superannuation and the so-called changes, continuing changes, create an area of terrible uncertainty for small business retirees or future retirees.
Yeah, you and me, Sam.
Leaves them stranded, totally and utterly stranded, and fearful for the future, for the future and their children.
Yep. Well, that's why I keep working.
Same here.
Make hay while the grass grows, because it may stop.
How do you both think the profession's reacting, or is they taking any notice, or need they, of what the ex-tax commissioner had to say a couple of years ago about especially accountants who were servicing the lower end of the market need to become a brilliant and trusted advisor? Do you have the feeling that people are doing that?
If I may, I read a lot and I follow the scene abroad a lot, because I feel that we're not pioneers in this area. The concept of advisory services is certainly a scene in America which is well advanced in Australia. In America, you get a sense, and I know one or two accountants who have implemented virtual CFO models, and America leads the way on virtual CFO. We're probably 10 years behind with the American situation. And a virtual CFO model, I think, will be the ultimate goal of any accounting practice, whatever size it is, because the clients need that service, and increasingly more clients are demanding that service. I mean, there was a recent survey not long ago by Mild, for example, which showed that 52% of small business owners were interested in having those advisory services. And the question was, what happened to the other 48%? And I think that percentage will change. In America, it's certainly not 52. It's more like 78, 80%. So that mindset in small business has to change. Secondly, how many accountants of their own volition want to be in this space? And increasingly more and more will be, because they'll have the tools, the automation to be able to do this. And that, I think, is the future model, the virtual CFO, because something else props up. The ATO threatens us with total changes in the model of the way taxation compliance will work in this country within the next decade. that'll lead to diminution of compliance services
Yep.
and therefore the kind of work that too many an accountant does. So they'll be forced into a position of offering advisory services merely because they won't survive on compliance. And this is around the corner. I mean, I think Chris Jordan, in a speech in September 22, made that very clear where they're heading.
Yeah.
But I remember what Jordan said in that speech, and I now reflect on that speech and say to myself, what happened? In that speech, what he said is that this model can only be done in conjunction with the profession. And he said, I remember that vividly, that comment, you are with us in the driver's seat. And what's happened the last 2 years is clearly showing that we are not in the driver's seat, that we are more like roadkill rather than partners. Yeah. And I say to myself, what was he thinking? Even in those days, this was not the case. Today, for example, I think many a compliance firm finds that dealing with the ATO is an exceptionally difficult task. For example, in small business, it's critically important that the avenues of mediation as an alternative to litigation will be the major facet of what ATO does. And today, I feel every single model they developed in the last 5 or 6 years on mediation has failed. Every accountant tells you, what's the point? You never get an answer back. The process is so long and prolonged and leads to many discomforting outcomes. And if you really want to have a challenge, you've got to litigate. But who can afford the litigation nowadays? Really, even smaller, even the larger firms. And also, the mindset of the people that you deal with the ATO nowadays is not helpful. It's not designed to elicit a response in a timely manner, but drags out to the point where you simply give up. Now, once upon a time when I started as an accountant in tax area, what was critically important is the yearly visits by client liaison officers with whom you could speak about your common problems and who take your interests to heart. And they did communicate, they did resolve issues. Today, there's no one to talk to, absolutely no one. And the tragedy of that is the government needs us to implement their strategies, and that's not happening. Yep. I'm sorry I've been so long-winded on this.
All right. That's all right.
But
Andrew,
the interesting
do you
thing,
want to comment on what Sam just said then?
Yes, the interesting thing that Sam has said is about the automation that's occurring in the US, whereby if an accounting firm helps a small business client with their data capture and processing, the tax return and compliance form filling becomes a byproduct of that. And it allows you to take the revenue and the expense information and produce revenue analysis by various service or product line streams and help clients understand where their profit's coming from, and to do the same with expense control and then the management of stock and debtors. That's what's changing in America by saying to a client, let's automate your what used to be called bookkeeping. It's really data capture and analysis now. The tax returns are byproduct. Now let's sit with you once a month and someone will talk to you about the trends in your revenue and your expenses. That, Peter, you interviewed a bloke who's done this, an American practitioner, and that's my understanding of what they're doing. And I think that's what Sam's talking about. So we have the ability to talk to clients about that. What some of the practices in America are doing is asking their, what I'd call client liaison managers. The accountants who used to do compliance are now responsible for the setting up of these systems and talking to clients about them on a monthly basis. So it makes the job of accountant in a firm involved with clients, it makes it more interesting. So hopefully that might reverse some of the recruitment challenges and numbers you spoke about, Sam. I'm hopeful that instead of sitting out the back, not dealing with humans and churning data as they do, data entry and then checking and review, it'll mean that even graduates will be more involved with clients in looking at monthly business results reporting to the client, here's your latest revenue analysis, here's your latest stock and debtor situation. Hopefully that will make the job of accountant more interesting, but it doesn't do much to alleviate an aggressive or a administratively oriented tax department that's not being managed to focus on relationships with the profession. That's something the government has to initiate and drive through the leaders of the tax department to change that orientation. The profession can help.
I think also the aspect of image.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
As a professional, we're not sexy enough, as I say. The cost of accounting degrees are considerable. The fact that when you have competing demands of finance and technology industries, which typically have higher salaries, is a challenge for this profession, because we directly interface with a lot of businesses who cannot really afford our services, or try to, but they're not succeeding. And the type of people that we engage typically may feel disadvantaged if they had a chance in finance or technology, they would have done far better for their lifetimes. And I noticed, for example, in America, the CPA there, the organization, is running, would you believe, TikTok ads, trying to show how sexy and fun accounting can be. I'm not sure to what degree that's succeeding, and this has happened in the last 12 months, particularly, using TikTok. I think there's obviously, how do you arrest the decline in the accounting numbers? How do you offer better remuneration compared to other growing industries? And lastly, what do you actually teach accountants in apart from their normal accounting skills? As we discussed earlier, the issue of psychology, perhaps also emphasizing the economics component as well, and so on and so on.
And benchmarking and the interpretation of financial data, the sort of stuff Peter's articles are all about, that needs to be taught. Plus psychology, then they can talk to humans and they need less clients. Sam, I've had 8 clients in the last 10 years and have had more fun than ever before in my career because I'm deeply entrenched with the 8 of them.
Because you're part of the team.
I'm a tribal member. I'm the shaman. Correct.
And I think this is the issue that hopefully you've both been saying about virtual CFO services will enable accountants to be involved in. It's
changing the relationship focus.
Yeah, it's a relationship of being part of the team, and a very important part of the team. And you might well be virtual, of course, but it's
data analysis, Peter. It's here's the data, here's what the options of what you need to do to consider doing, rather than fill in this form and we'll submit it and send it to the tax department. It's a change of focus in involvement, and then it takes the focus from compliance with tax collection to discussion of financial trends with clients.
Yeah, so I was interested in, Sam, what you said about, and Andrew said the same thing, that the tax return should be a byproduct of this overall process. Tax is still very important, of course. At ESS BIZTOOLS, based on the insights we got from the American practitioner that Andrew was talking about, who was highly recommended to us by Plan Guru, who's the budgeting software package that we utilize. Out of that, we developed, which is now within the ESS BIZTOOLS package, Sam, the concept that the first thing that needs to be done is to understand your client in a lot more detail if you're going to be offering advisory services. 1 inch wide but a mile deep, rather than a mile wide and an inch deep, so that there's an understanding, because I think there's a lot more information. I know when I was the CFO of a listed public company, I knew a lot more things about that company than what I got to know about clients when I was just preparing the tax return. The other very high priority, I think, is business planning, and not just straight out of a textbook or copying what was done for some other client. We need to have the leadership team involved, and because they're the ones that have got to implement it.
Implement it. Yep.
And then the financial forecasts, which we're now, based on Plan Guru's input, we're calling them predictive accounting reports, budgets, cash flows. But the most important document, I think, is the projected balance sheet, to be able to sit down and have that conversation for the accountant to be the storyteller, to say, this is what you're going to look like in 3 years' time. And then the final part of that structure that we're putting in place now within our systems is the 52-week of the year business enhancement system, which is the key factor that comes from the American accounting firm that we're talking to, that unfortunately, I've forgotten his name, which I apologize for. But that is looking at daily, weekly, monthly type reporting, the sort of things that goes on in companies. In your experience with the commercial organisations, particularly Green Cross, Andrew, you've talked to me a number of times about the rhythm of meetings. Well, it's also the rhythm of reporting that goes on. There's a lot of things very important daily and then weekly. The industry I was in was the meat industry. We prepared weekly performance and profitability reports for every one of our businesses. We had over 500 of them all over the eastern states. And I think that's the role that accountants, if we're going to be offering advisory services, have got to be looking at delivering, together with everything else, the funding of the business, the debtors. The MYOB CEO wrote an interesting comment in the Financial Review in February about lack of fiscal management skills is what's causing the problems with SMEs, according to MYOB. So what do you both think about this overall conversation we've had? Would Doctor, who later became Professor Jeff Meredith, be happy with where the industry that FMRC were involved in at the beginning? The Institute was involved, the Australian Society of Accountants, now the CPA was involved, because they'd funded Meredith's trip when I first met him many years ago. He was going around Australia selling this concept.
Peter, he'd say that there's still a great opportunity there. That's a nice way of putting it, I think.
Yeah. Sam, did you ever know Jeff Meredith?
Well, I remember those days very vividly because it was a pioneering era. And I remember very much even the discussions that I had with Andrew, for example, when he came to analyze our firm, when I first joined with Edwards Pearl, when I merged my practice, which was a one-man show with a four-partner firm, and Andrew was kind enough to come down and proffer analysis. The difficulty I found is I was gung-ho, the others weren't.
Yeah.
And that was an enormous lesson how to enlist people to get on board. But I think there was a comment made by an American accounting academic not long ago, University of Richmond, who said that what we got to do is to become interpreters of data rather than bean counters. And to make not so much fun of this industry, but to give us important contributing role, much greater role in the conduct of the way business is run. One of the things that I've always been puzzled by is that whenever you engage a finance professional in the area of investment, the first thing they do is they pull out a questionnaire on risk, the so-called one of those things being like a phenometric list of grading a client in terms of risk, what level of risk he's prepared to tolerate. We don't use that predominantly. And I think this should be an element in trying to understand the client better, but introducing even a greater propensity for risk analysis to begin with. Where do they stand on that spectrum? And acting accordingly. What are they prepared to tolerate? What can you offer them that will minimize that risk? Because all the tools that you've produced, Peter, are designed to reduce failure in small businesses. And on the other aspect, which is important, which you've developed the last decade or so, is to say to the business, there are aspects of help even offered by this present government, previous governments, in terms of encouraging development of early stage businesses, of using R&D incentives better, because not enough businesses which are capable of doing this enter into that space.
Seek help. Yeah.
And this is, and it's something I want to perhaps describe, because a recent development in my family, where my daughter married an Israeli fellow who was a very senior IT consultant. His father is a brilliant professor of physics who's taught a generation of students, both in US and in Israel. But what is interesting is how many startups he's been involved with. Even though he's still an academic, I would say hundreds and hundreds. And the mentality that he developed was to listen, to encourage, and to lead. And I think to a large degree, this is what ESS BIZTOOLS has done. It's to create a framework, an environment of where you can go and seek help and get it, and it works.
Yep.
Thank you. Andrew, you want to wrap up on?
Just here. I agree with Sam. You want to help your clients. You can't help them all. Pick the ones that are receptive, utilize your tools, and go and introduce them to them and have conversations around that. That's business advisory. Start the process. You can't help them if you're checking tax returns sitting on your bum in your office.
And I can remember the adage you used to use, Andrew.
Oh,
you
dear.
start off with one or two. That's your starting point, and go from there.
Yep, very important. So thank you very much, Sam and Andrew. This has been very interesting. We probably should have done this years ago, but we probably didn't have the technology. But
We do not.
Sam, thank you very much, mate.
My pleasure.
You've been a very loyal supporter of ESS BIZTOOLS for a long time. Congratulations on your career. And
Thank you.
when you decide you're going to go into retirement, I hope you enjoy it. And and one
I'll
day,
try.
Carlton, I'm sure, will win again. I remember the first time I met you, you declared your allegiance to Carlton Football Club. So
Well, I only got one thing out of it in the last little while, and that's Crips winning the Brownlow, but nothing else.
Well, that happens. Anyhow. And Andrew, again, thank you very much for your participation today. And,
Pleasure. Good to see you both.
It's great to talk to you and get your insight.
Well,
thank you, Peter.
Now,
Thank you.
if
Thank you,
anyone
Sam.
wants to make contact with you that see this podcast, are you happy that they contact you?
Absolutely.
You happy on that, Sam?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being with us. And for those of you watching this podcast, thank you very much. And if you have any questions that you would like to talk to Sam or Andrew about, or me about ESS BIZTOOLS, just send me an email and I'll refer it on to Andrew and Sam. Peter at essbiztools.com.au. Thank you very much.
Pete.
Have a great day.
See you, Sam.
Thank you.
Cheers now.
All the best.
See you, Andrew. See you, Sam.
And bye-bye.
Bye-bye.